Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome to all of our Lapidniks who are watching from across the fruited plain. It is a joy and a blessing to be with you, and all of you who are watching from around our precious globe and world, from all the far-reaching places, from South Africa to Australia to New Zealand and Austria and Argentina and all those beautiful places. Welcome. And we're glad to have you here. I am Rabbi Griffin. I am the founder of Lapid Judaism. For those of you who are new, I am the rabbi of Sar Shalom Synagogue, which, by the way, I just want to emphasize that because, again, for new people, we have the YouTube program here, and you see it each and every day. Hopefully, you're faithfully watching and or listening on podcasts. We have it on podcasts as well, on Anchor. All you have to do is Google Rabbi Mordecai Griffin Anchor, and you can pull up the podcast, and you can listen to that whenever. But I also wanted to say, just occurred to me actually yesterday when I was thinking about it, that we actually have a real live brick and mortar synagogue right here in Saginaw, which is a suburb of Fort Worth, Texas, here in the northern part of the state of Texas. So it's one of the largest Orthodox synagogues in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and it's a real live synagogue with real live people in it. And so on Shabbat, we obviously do not have the Aliyah day because we are in shul, we're in synagogue. And so you can go to our website, which is mysarshalom.com. It should be in the description of this video, and you can log on to our live stream page. You can become a live stream follower, and you can watch us and be with us during our Shabbat services, as do many hundreds of people, perhaps even approaching thousands of people across the United States and the world who do so. So I want to make you aware of that. So again, welcome. If you're new, please subscribe. Please click the bell icon to be sure and stay tuned to everything that we have coming forth. Their legend has it that there is a video coming out by our very own Gabbai, Aleph Mimtav, that would be Emet. So I believe that legend might be real, and it's coming. It may come to pass soon and come to a YouTube theater near you. We are in Parshat Vayera, and we are going to be finding ourselves on page 79 in your Chumash. Somebody asked me yesterday after our synagogue service, a new person said, what do I need to get to have all these resources? And I said, the first thing you need to buy is a Art Scroll Chumash. That'll be your first purchase. Second, after that, I would suggest a Rashi commentary. So anyway, we are finding ourselves reading in the chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. This will be our Aliyah reading. I'm going to be talking today to a large extent about circumcision and bris milah and the meaning thereof and all the particular insights. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll get to all of it, but never fear. We have 6 whole days to study this parasha together, which means we'll just be scratching the surface. All right. So chapter 18, verse 1, Adonai appeared to him in the plains of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. He lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing over him. He perceived, so he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent and bowed toward the ground. And he said, my Lord, if I find favor in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant. So everybody agrees that Avraham was recovering from his bris milah. He was sitting by his tent and overcoming that. And that he was visited by these 3 quote-unquote angels, which is in fact Hashem and 2 angels, or as we like to say, Memtet and 2 angels, or that would be the Mashiach and 2 angels. Nevertheless, one of the lessons derived here is the lesson of visiting the sick, that Hashem visits the sick. And I should just want to add to that the sages bring down that when, and by the way, science pretty much proves this, that when you visit someone who is ill, that contributes to their healing. The sages say many thousands of years ago that when we visit the sick, we contribute to 1/60th of their healing. And that's why it's important to visit those who are not feeling so good. So verse 4 says, let some water be brought, and wash your feet, and recline beneath the tree. I will fetch a morsel of bread, that you may sustain yourself, then go on, inasmuch as you have passed your servant's way. They said, do as you have said. So Avraham hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, hurry, 3 seahs of meal, fine flour, and knead and make cakes. Then Avraham ran to the cattle, took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the youth who hurried to prepare it. He took cream and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and placed them before them. He stood over them beneath the tree, and they ate. They said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. And he said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well on in years. The manner of women had ceased to be with Sarah. She was in menopause, or as my chihuahuas like to say, mini-pause. And Sarah laughed at herself, saying, after I have withered, shall I again have delicate skin, and my husband is old? Then Adonai said to Avram, why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, though I have aged? Is anything beyond Adonai? At the appointed time, that's a moed, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. So many believe that the time at which God had appeared to Abraham was the time of Rosh Hashanah. And because he said this is going to be a moed, and therefore it's an appointed time, and I will be back a year from now, and she'll have a boy. And so many people believe, many of the sages that is, that he was born during Rosh Hashanah. So I want to switch now and look at the introduction to this parasha from the Kehol Tumash, because there's a lot to be said about obviously this parasha, but also specifically as we start talking just about the concept and ideas surrounding bris milah, surrounding circumcision. First and foremost, the Kehol Tumash brings out this fascinating fact that it is in Parasha Lech Lecha and Parshat Vayera where we hear about the life of Abraham. And there are many parallels. It's almost as if there are 2 lives that have been lived by Abraham, and the point of transition that sits between the 2 parallels is circumcision. And I think what we're about to read here can help a great many people understand the idea of conversion. Many people ask me, by people I mean in most cases, and what I'm talking about here are Christian people who love Hashem. They've been Christians maybe for a number of years. They realize that something is missing. They don't know what it is. They find us. They find out what's missing, and now they're confronted by old theological tapes that play in their head. And many people say, well, why? Well, the question, let me rephrase. The question is, do you have to be converted in order to be saved? And first of all, I understand the question, because that question is born out of 2,000 years of errant theology. And if you actually study scripture, study Jewish thought, study conversion, you find that the question is kind of nonsensical. And I don't mean this, not that the person is wrong for asking, please don't misunderstand. I'm dealing here simply scientifically with the question. Okay. The question is nonsensical. The question is kind of, it's kind of oxymoronic, you might say. Why? Well, you have to understand that many people who ask those questions, they fully believe in the concept of water baptism, that you confess, your faith in Mashiach, and then you go and get water baptized, and voila, you're a Christian. The question becomes, where does water baptism come from? What did it represent in the first century? Who cares what it represents today? What does it represent in the first century? That's all that matters, right? When Yeshua and the apostles were encouraging people to get water baptized, what was it that he was telling them to do, and why? And what did it mean for a non-Jew for that to happen? It's one thing for a Jew to get water baptized. What does it mean for a non-Jew? Well, here's the answer. So in the first century, it wasn't water baptism. It was mikvah. Okay, number one. Number two, the only reason you went to a mikvah was for transition, change, to be born again, to become a new creation. You went there to die, to be resurrected. That's why you went to mikvah. If you were a Jew, it meant that you experienced a born again experience again. If you were a non-Jew and you went to the mikvah, it can only mean one thing. It can only mean one thing. It can only mean that you become a Jew, period. There is no other. You won't find anywhere in Jewish thought, anywhere. And by the way, the mikvah, water baptism, is completely Pharisaical. It's 100% from the oral tradition. 100%. So if you believe in water baptism, you're a Pharisee. Welcome to the family. So you'll never find anywhere in Jewish thought where somebody who's not Jewish can go to the mikvah and somehow come out of the water and not be Jewish. First of all, you wouldn't even go to the water if you weren't Jewish. So the idea is, do I have to be converted in order to be saved? Is a little bit of an oxymoron, because you wouldn't be saved unless you were converted. Aha. What does it mean to be saved? Well, to be saved in most people's mind means that when you die, you don't go to hell. Well, that's not what it means to be saved from the Jewish perspective. And again, it doesn't matter what it means today. It only matters what it meant in the first century when people were being called into salvation. What does it mean to be saved from a Jewish point of view, which is the only point of view that matters, with all due respect? And the answer is, to be saved is to be in covenant. In other words, so think it through for a second. So people ask, and again, I don't have a problem with people asking, because I completely understand. It makes complete sense why somebody would ask me, and I don't fault them at all, and I'm glad they do ask. I want to be abundantly clear. Again, I'm dealing here strictly scientifically with the question. And that means that when you are saved, quote unquote, it means you're in covenant. What covenant? There's only one, the covenant of Torah. And so if you're not keeping Torah, you are like Avram. Notice I said Avram, not Avraham. What do I mean by that? Let's go back to our parallel. See if this helps us clear it up. I've often told people it's like a marriage, by the way. When you get engaged to somebody, you ask this lady, will you marry me? She miraculously says yes. That means you're not allowed to see other people, right? Once you're engaged, it's not like you can continue dating. So you're committed to each other, but yet you're not yet married. When do you get married? When you go under the huppah. And the sages oftentimes relate the waters of the mikvah to a huppah. So it says the fact of Abraham's life per se is chronicled in two parashot indicates that it's comprised two different phases of his life. In fact, if we examine the events recorded in these two parashot, we are left with the impression that Abraham repeated in Parshat Vayera virtually everything he did in Parashat Lech Lecha. Both parashot open with him experiencing a revelation of God and receiving the promise of progeny. And both parashot, his wife Sarah is abducted by a Gentile king. In both parashot, he fathers his son, banishes Hagar, enters into treaties. In both parashot, his righteous behavior is contrasted with the immoral behavior of his nephew Lot. In both parashot, he defends the cities of the plain and Lech Lecha against human assailants, and Vayeira against the divine decree of Sodom and Gomorrah. It is as if they write, Abraham had repeated everything he experienced in his first parasha, his first life or level of being, but on a different level, in order to infuse his past accomplishments with a new divine level of divine consciousness. In other words, Abraham, there came a transition for Abraham. There was first, and I think that this is very instructive, because we see Abraham first of all, Abraham is a convert. So when people again ask, do I have to be a convert to be saved? I would just ask, what about Abraham? In order for Abraham to be, quote, saved, that means come in the covenant, he first had to convert to this idea. He had to leave paganism and become a Jew. So he started his process, but then his process was elevated to a whole new level with what? Circumcision. So that his new life was a reflection of his old life, but at a higher level. And notice his old life here we're talking about is a spiritual life. It wasn't as we're not talking about his pagan life. He wasn't a pagan as Abraham or Avram, Slika. Nevertheless, he became a Jew when he fully embraced the covenant. So it says the event that divides Abraham's life into two distinct spiritual periods is his circumcision, his bris milah. This event is related at the very end of Parashat Vayera, so that Abraham begins his life as a circumcised Jew only in Parshat Vayera. It follows, therefore, that Abraham's life prior to circumcision is one of lech lecha, going to your true self, while his life after progression his life after circumcision is one of Vayeira. God appeared to him. So they write in Parashat lech lecha, Abraham progresses on his own, steadily ascending the ladder of spiritual progress as far as human efforts can take him. In Parshat Vayera, God appears to him and elevates him to a level of spiritual life beyond that of human reach. In other words, circumcision represents going beyond human understanding, going beyond human limitations, going into a new level, if you will, a high spiritual level. And Abraham was willing to do just this. I want to read to you something here from Rabbi Monk's commentary. This is actually an insight from lech lecha towards the end of his commentary of lech lecha, but this is what it says. Because many people today, if you talk to them about theology, they have this opinion, all right? The opinion is, we don't really need the law of Moses anymore, okay? We don't need all those civil laws and all those religious laws, all those ceremonial laws. We don't need that anymore. All we need is the moral laws. Don't murder, don't lie, don't smoke, don't drink, don't chew tobacco, don't go with girls that do, right? Those are all the moral laws. We have to worry about those and none of the others. Well, let's read this. It says, now Avram must reach a higher level still than, excuse me. Avram must reach a higher level still, which is the Torah. Its prototype is the commandment of circumcision, which is at the threshold of existence for the Jew. Abraham had to learn that to be a Jew, that's somebody who's in covenant with the living God, a Jew, all Jews are Jews. Why? Because we're called after the king. In other words, the king comes from Judah, right? If we're not called after the king, Jew, then we're not in his kingdom. So people that say, well, I want to follow the king of Judah, but I don't want to be a Jew, that's problematic. It's like saying, I want to live in America and be American, but I don't want to be called an American. I don't want to become a citizen, but I want to enjoy all the benefits. We don't want to be an illegal alien, do we? So it says, Abram had to learn that to be a Jew serving God through being moral and practicing the moral virtues is not enough. This is codified, my friends, in Jewish thought, that being moral and practicing the moral virtues is not enough. It is certainly important. It is certainly valuable. Many would say, if you look at Pirkei Avot, it is a prerequisite, but it's not enough. It says the covenant established with God for the greatest good of all humanity demands more from Avram and his offspring. It demands absolute, free-willed obedience to the law proclaimed by God. The law of Moses is, in fact, the law of God. Most people don't know that. Did you know that? Did you know that most people think the law of Moses is Moses' own commandments? No, people don't realize that the law of Moses is the law of God. So people say, I no longer want to be under the law. What they're saying is, I no longer want to be under God's word. Nobody actually believes that. If they're rational people, nobody actually believes that, but that's what they teach. They teach it not knowing, because there's a lot of confusion today. But anyway, I digress. It says, for he alone knows the secret of the universal harmony, that harmony which is the basis for the salvation of the world and of its individuals and peoples, and he alone is able to promulgate those laws capable of restoring this harmony, which has been disturbed from the day of the first sin. We don't know how to bring harmony to the universe. We don't know how to do that. And so, therefore, we do not have a prerogative of deciding which spiritual laws we're going to follow and which we're not going to follow, because we have no idea what we're doing. We have a recipe and we need to follow the recipe exactly. It says the covenant with Avram is devoted to the realization of this task for all humanity. Now, Onkelos was a convert to Judaism in the first century. He wrote a commentary, or not a commentary rather, but a translation of the Torah in Aramaic, and it's considered fundamental to Torah study. So Onkelos gets this idea. He gets this concept of the importance of circumcision. I also want to say this at this juncture. Consider for yourself, why do you think the enemy fights against circumcision so much? What is it about circumcision that if you look at all the despots in history, whether it's Caesar or Pharaoh or Stalin or Hitler or who knows, name a despot, okay? Name a dictator, name an evil emperor somewhere. One of the three things they always forbid is circumcision. So if you think about that, if you find yourself, God forbid, standing against the concept of circumcision, look around and look at with whom you're standing. Question becomes why? And let's not forget what I taught last week, that one of the names of Lucifer is uncircumcised. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that the enemy is so against this act? And that the answer is because it's filled with much spiritual power on a very esoteric, if you will, level. So it says, these ideas regarding the command, Vayeira tamim, and be perfect before me, given at the head of the chapter, whose main objective is the commandment of circumcision, imply that the underlying reason for it are beyond our comprehension. In other words, God commanded circumcision. We don't understand it. In reality, in the grand scheme of things, it's a little bitty piece of flesh removed from the human body. What can that possibly, how can that possibly affect us on any rational level? And the answer is we can't comprehend it. It says, indeed, the covenant is called Sod Adonai. That is a divine secret, a divine hidden level of meaning. This is from the Midrash Rabbah. The numerous reasons suggested for it are at best approximations. And the Midrash Tanchuma, I believe, it's called a huk. That is a commandment that there is no rational explanation for. Thus, we are not allowed to give it an explanation. This goes for kosher eating, by the way, just as an aside. This is why we can't say, well, we eat kosher because it's healthy. No, we eat kosher because God commanded us to eat kosher because somehow it affects our spirituality. So it says, no one saw this more clearly than Onkelos, the proselyte. In answer to the reproaches of his uncle, who was the Emperor Hadrian. Imagine that. Okay, for all of you out there who are saying to yourself, man, I really want to convert, and I really feel like this is what God is calling me to do, but I'm concerned about Aunt Susie. I just want you to be encouraged that Onkelos' uncle was the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Talk about a rift with family ties. Nobody out there has an Uncle Hadrian who's a Roman emperor. You might think he is, but he's not. So when he says, he affirmed that comprehending the Torah is subordinate to the act of circumcision. The relationship of cause and effect existed between them can only be of a mystical nature. In other words, before one can truly comprehend Torah, before one can really have their understanding, the enlightenment of their understanding brought to bear, you have to go through circumcision. You have to go through conversion to really be able to get it. This is why I was saying yesterday in the Drash that one has to embrace Judaism in its full. You can't just study Jewish literature and still be a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or Christian. You have to embrace it from a Jewish mind. It says circumcision is an insight here from the Kehul Tumash about circumcision, allowing us to see clearly. It says, true, God appeared to Avraham 3 times in Parashat Lech Lecha. But these appearances were veiled and vague in comparison to his appearance in Parshat Vayera. The reason for this is straightforward enough. Until circumcision, Abraham's progress, as we said, was limited by the constraints of his own human nature. He could only go as far as his own mind and heart could take him. It was therefore impossible for God to reveal himself to Abraham directly. Abraham could only experience God through the prism of his own being. You know, conversion, coming into the circumcised life is how we see clearly. I think this is why people tell me, and many people have said this through the years, too many times to enumerate. They've said things such as, I've learned more in 20 days or 30 days at Sar Shalom than I have in 20 years in my former congregation. And I obviously we're honored for such accolades, and we're blessed by that and very, very thankful. But I think the reason is that when you come into this, you see clearly, you absorb clearly, and when you're not in the Jewish mind, your heart has not been converted as it were fully, then it's really difficult to pick up on truths. Circumcision represents self-nullification. Thus, by circumcising himself in response to God's explicit command, Abraham entered an entirely new type of relationship with him. There's a discussion before this about the fact that the Torah has always existed, and people kept the Torah because it was the right thing to do. But what transitioned here is that God gave Abraham a specific commandment to circumcise himself. So when we are commanded to do something and therefore follow it versus just doing it as our own free will, there is a higher level to that. And that seems sometimes that seems counterintuitive. Some people think, well, if I follow commandments by my own free will, that's more righteous, right, than if I'm commanded to do so. No. Why? Because, as I'm about to read here, you got to think this through clearly. If you're following the Torah by your own free will, that's because you want to. And so therefore you're doing it, which is, by the way, is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. But when somebody comes up to you and says, such as God, I want you to do thus, now you're being told what to do. Doesn't matter if you want to or not. So you have to nullify yourself. See, before you didn't have to nullify yourself because yourself wanted to do it. But now when you're commanded to do it, it requires a whole new level of submission. This is why people are so comfortable with the buffet style of faith. Because I get to choose. Versus God saying, no, you have to do this. We don't like people to tell us that we have to do anything. And oftentimes that's God. So it says, thus by circumcising himself to God's explicit command, Abraham entered into an entirely new type of relationship with him. By nullifying his own will before God's, Abraham attained a level of self-effacement he could never have achieved beforehand. His own ego could now dissolve and cease to interpose between God on the one hand and his own mind and heart on the other. You realize that when people oppose Torah, true Judaism, and Messiah, a lot of times that's just ego. One final thing. We're going to come back to this topic tomorrow because there's much more to share. But let me just conclude our time together this morning with this insight from Joseph Hamadan, who was writing in Sefer Tamei HaMitzvot. And we'll explore this perhaps more tomorrow. But if you notice on the mezuzah, every mezuzah has Shaddai on it. And it begins with the sheen. If you look at a mezuzah, every mezuzah has to have the sheen on it. The sheen stands for Shaddai. Some mezuzot have Shaddai in it. They have the sheen, dalet, yod. We, as human beings, are like a mezuzah. We're all different. A mezuzah can be made out of anything. Some are really elaborate. Some are less elaborate. They're all different colors and shapes. But every mezuzah, despite its color and shape and size and material, all of them have two things in common. Number one, Shaddai on the outside, the mark of God's name upon it. And two, the word of God on the inside. Interestingly enough, in Sefer Chatamei HaMitzvot, it writes that the nose is like the sheen, and the hand is like the dalet, and circumcision is like the yud, Shaddai. If we have the sheen and the dalet, the nose and the hand, but we've chosen not to be circumcised, instead of Shaddai, we have shade. And the word shade means demon. End of our Aliyah today. We'll come back tomorrow and discuss this in more detail and, of course, get into our Aliyah material and other topics. So much to share. Thank you for joining me this morning. And I pray that you have a blessed and wonderful first day of the week. And with God's help, we'll see everybody tomorrow. Shalom and blessings.